Today I wanted to share an imaginary story with you. So with that in mind, what I want you to envisage is, what would it be like if aliens landed on our planet and started studying the musical behavior of about 97% of all of our bass players? Then they go back and report that most of the bass players on planet Earth have adopted a really strange habit. They go on to explain how humans learn and perform methods of sound in different meters, and they call this music. However, even though what they do is based on sound, weirdly, they try to access this not by sound, but by vision. Sound familiar? So this educational conundrum, of course, has many drawbacks and can severely set back your musical development. I see so many bass players who try to learn the bass guitar in visual terms with the hope that eventually they'll be able to hear what they play. But most of the time this never happens. And to be quite honest, the visual approach of only learning what patterns look like on the instrument can really start to overcomplicate the learning process when you're first starting out. I've been saying for years that the majority of ear training happens every time you pick up your bass and play it. In fact, contrary to popular belief, ear training is the process of memorizing sounds so that you can recall them at a later time. Far too many people think ear training is some mystical process of working with a bunch of ear training apps, and then when they practice their bass, they go right back to memorizing patterns, not sounds. I'm going to show you a couple of exercises today demonstrating how to put the emphasis on sound from a beginner's perspective up to an intermediate and advanced standpoint. Because most beginners already know what a major scale looks like, let's start there. So when most people learn a major scale, this is pretty much the way they do it. And then they move on to the next thing. They think they've got that down. And a lot of times their technique isn't worked out, but more importantly, they don't understand the sound. When you just play through a scale like that, you have no real idea of what the relationship of those notes are. You just play the scale up and down. In fact, for many people who are just starting out, this is just a noise in the background. It doesn't really have anything to do with any kind of melodic approach. It is just something they hear, almost a blur or a blob of sound. So to start combating that, what we want to do is we want to play each individual note and let it last for the full duration, or let it just ring as long as it rings. For the demonstration, I probably won't do that fully because when you have a bass like this, the sustain is just insane. So we might be here all day just listening to how long the note will last. But we'll kind of cut it somewhere halfway in the middle with that. So you play the first note. I really want to meditate on that note. And I want to meditate on that till that is the root. That is the tonic of the key. Then I go to the next note. And I hold it. And I want to let that ring as long as it can. Then I go to the next one. And I'm actually spending time while I'm practicing this, listening to each successive tone. Now, another thing that I can really work on is my technique. All the left-hand technique factors that I cover in my bass foundation course, which of course is curling the fingers, holding the fingers down behind any fretted note, keeping the thumb behind the bass, behind the second finger, creating that sort of triangular sort of shape with your hand, so you have the sort of optimum position there. And all those things you can really focus in on when you play something that slow. But more importantly is focusing in on the relationship of the sound. This is so important and often goes amiss when people practice. They're just practicing where to put their fingers, and they're just focusing and concentrating on the coordination issues and not on the sound. Now, in the beginning, it's hard with all those coordination issues, and this is why I've put together this base foundation course. Of course, you can sign up for that right over here, but there's a few places left. The course starts at August 31st, so make sure if you're interested to get your spot. But the thing about it is that when you slow things down to this degree, it enables you to now start concentrating on the sound. And this is the point of this lesson. Even just within the stuff that I'm going to show you of how this builds, this is really the point. Because a lot of people don't do this, and then when they practice, they never listen. So then an ear training exercise is something removed from them having their bass in their hands most of the time. Becomes like listening to some kind of interval tape or something like that. I'm not saying the tape won't help you. The tape might work as a good addendum to what you're doing with your bass, but if you do not start with it here, you're going to be stuffed with being able to hear anything that you play, and that's just the way that it goes. So this is super important. Now, where we want to take this now is we want to understand that a melody, what is a melody? Well, a melody is only a melody because it has a relationship to another note. So a melody is a succession of notes. So you're always really listening to what the last note was to the current note, and then where that current note is going, and so forth. Even if there's rests in between, it's unless the melody ends, it is going to have some progression that goes with it. So to understand melody, you have to understand the relationship between the notes. And this is where intervals come in to be one of the most important things. And if you haven't watched my lesson on intervals, check it out over here, because this is super important. And I always say this, the two most important things about music theory is understanding the keys and understanding the intervals. If you do not know these things, you will always have problems with music theory. So if we go back and we look at the idea of playing each two-note grouping within the major scale, there's lots of different ways we can do this. We're just going to stop at this, though, for this demonstration. So if and again, I want to hold these notes very long, but for the example, I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to play C, and then I'm going to go to D, and then I'm going to stop, and then I'm going to go D, and then I'm going to go to E. Now, of course, in application, you want to do this much longer, but for the demo, I'm going to do it a little shorter. Then you want to go E, and then you go F, and then you want to go F, and then you want to go G. You want to focus the sound of those notes, the character of how each note moves to the next. Then you want to go G to A, and then you want to go A to B, and then you want to go B to C. And you could do this going back down as well. Now, here's the deal. Don't worry if in the beginning you don't get this approach down straight away. You don't see it immediately. Okay, this takes a little time to train your ear, to train your brain to sort of think this way. So over time, you'll start to hear the music relationships regarding pitch recognition by introducing this type of methodology into your practice routine. Now, once you start to be able to hear the relationship between each successive note of the major scale, you want to start comparing the sound between the major scale and the relative minor scale from the same root note. This is really important. So you would do something like this. Again, in practice, when I'm focusing on sound and sound comparison, I want to go much slower, but that's a bit boring for the video. So I'm just going to play it. Here's the major scale. Here's the minor scale. And what you want to do is go back and forth comparing the sound. So you hear that brightness of the major scale. Versus the darkness of that minor scale. Then you can start moving up in half steps and doing this whole thing. This could be a good half an hour routine of just exercising your ear to hear something. Okay, and really just rely on trying to hear the sound. Don't get too caught up with terminology at this point. You really want to be focusing on the sound first and foremost. So taking this up another level, what we want to do is start to compare each mode of the major scale to each mode of the melodic minor scale. Again, like the previous exercise, we want to be practicing these all from the same root note. Now here's the deal though with this, is that notice how I started off by just playing the major scale, playing the notes very slowly. I want you to play them slower as long as your instrument will sustain that note, and then you play the next note. Then you played every succession of every two notes in the scale in two note groupings. That's the beginner level. The intermediate level is when you start to take the major scale and compare it with the natural minor scale from the same root note. That's intermediate level. The more advanced level is when you're actually doing this. So what we're going to do is we're going to take each mode of the major scale, and we're going to then compare that side by side with each mode of the melodic minor. So I will play the first mode of the major scale, which is the major scale, or sometimes called the Ionian mode. Then the next thing I'm going to play is the melodic minor scale. And this is the same, it's jazz minor. You play the melodic minor ascending and descending the same way. So root 2, flat 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and root. Okay. Then the second scale is going to be taking Dorian and then comparing that with Dorian flat 2 from the melodic minor scale. Then the third is Phrygian and comparing that with the Lydian augmented from the melodic minor scale. Then 4 is Lydian compared to Lydian flat 7. Then 5 is Mixolydian compared to Mixolydian flat 6. Then 6 is Aeolian compared to the Locrian natural 2. And then 7 is Locrian compared to altered. So this is very cool to do. And okay, it might be a little bit more advanced, but so if you don't know this bit, you don't have to take part in it. Maybe that's something you can work up to. Okay, but if you kind of know the modes, a lot of guys do, but they can't do anything with them, and they certainly can't hear them. So this is a good exercise to start to grease those muscles. Okay, so if we start off, I'm going to play major. Melodic minor. Dorian. Dorian flat 2. Phrygian, Lydian augmented, Lydian, Lydian flat 7, Mixolydian, Mixolydian flat 6, Aeolian or natural minor, Locrian natural 2, Locrian, the altered scale, a major stumbling block for bass players just getting started is the jargon that goes along with musical categorization. We have to deal with things like diminished fourths, whole tone scales, chromatic approach notes, triad pairs, and a whole bunch of other stuff with difficult names to remember. In order to stay on top of this, we need to understand that the sound comes first, which is rarely talked about, and then the names come later. But after you start practicing, where you start paying attention to the sound of what you're playing, with the goal of memorizing that sound for future recall, the names of these sounds start to function as just labels for something far more important. Approaching this in this way, you'll never find an overcomplicated bit of terminology standing in between where you are as a musician and what you want to play. Please remember to like and subscribe, and even better, share this video with your friends. That way YouTube will think I'm awesome. And if you subscribe, make sure to click on the notifications bell. That way, every time I release a new video, you'll be immediately notified. Until next time, practice smart, work hard, and play creatively.